Welcome back. Our podcast reading series has returned. I think we're going to be calling this The Words of Others. I think that's a reasonable title. Before we get out of 2019, I really wanted to make sure that we got to the extensive series about essentially greenwashing and capitalist underpinnings of different environmental movements happening around the world right now. This has been covered very well by the independent investigative journalist Cory Morningstar, who has been getting more and more mentions in independent media of late. I was listening to the Slow News Day podcast with Steve Poikonen the other day, and he brought up Cory Morningstar's work. This first piece in a series was published back in January of this year, and it's a 6-part series. If you haven't heard of Cory Morningstar, I'll just read her bio real quick. She is an independent investigative journalist, writer, and environmental activist, focusing on global ecological collapse and political analysis of the nonprofit industrial complex. She resides in Canada. Her recent writings can be found on Wrong Kind of Green, The Art of Annihilation, which is one of her websites that I'll be reading from today, and Counterpunch. Her writing has also been published by Bolivia Rising and Cambio, the official newspaper of the plurinational state of Bolivia. This first piece in her 6-part series is called The Manufacturing of Greta Thunberg, For Consent, The Political Economy of the Nonprofit Industrial Complex, Act 1. And this was published on January 17th of 2019. And Cory opens the piece with a quote, which I'm going to read. What's infuriating about manipulations by the nonprofit industrial complex is that they harvest goodwill of the people, especially young people. They target those who were not given skills and knowledge to truly think for themselves by institutions which are designed to serve the ruling class. Capitalism operates systematically and structurally like a cage to raise domesticated animals. Those organizations and their projects which operate under false slogans of humanity in order to prop up the hierarchy of money and violence are fast becoming some of the most crucial elements of the invisible cage of corporatism, colonialism, and militarism. And this is a quote from the artist Hiroyuki Hamada. And here Cory offers an overview of the series before we dive into the meat of this very first piece. She explains that in Act 1, I disclosed that Greta Thunberg, the current child prodigy and face of the youth movement to combat climate change, serves as special youth advisor and trustee to the burgeoning mainstream tech startup We Don't Have Time. I then explore the ambitions behind the tech company We Don't Have Time. In Act 2, I illustrate how today's youth are the sacrificial lambs for the ruling elite. Also in this act, I introduce the board members and advisors to We Don't Have Time. I explore the leadership in the nascent We Don't Have Time and the partnerships between the well-established corporate environmental entities, Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, 350.org, Avaz, Global Utmaning, Global Challenge, the World Bank, and the World Economic Forum. In Act 3, I deconstruct how Al Gore and the planet's most powerful capitalists are behind today's manufactured youth movements and why. I explore the We Don't Have Time Thunberg connections to Our Revolution, the Sanders Institute, This Is Zero Hour, the Sunrise Movement, and the Green New Deal. I also touch upon Thunberg's famous family, in particular, Thunberg's celebrity mother, Malena Ernman, who is the World Wildlife Foundation Environmental Hero of 2017, and her August 2018 book launch. I then explore the generous media attention afforded to Thunberg in both May and April of 2018 by SvD, one of Sweden's largest newspapers. In Act 4, I examine the current campaign now unfolding in, quote, leading the public into emergency mode, unquote. More importantly, I summarize who and what this mode is to serve. In Act 5, I take a closer look at the Green New Deal. I explore data for progress and the targeting of female youth as a key femographic. I connect the primary architect and authors of the Green New Deal data to the World Resources Institute. From there, I walk you through the interlocking Business and Sustainable Development Commission and the New Climate Economy, a project of the World Resources Institute. I disclose the common thread between these groups and the assignment of money to nature, represented by the Natural Capital Coalition and the nonprofit industrial complex as an entity. Finally, I reveal how this has culminated in the implementation of payments for ecosystem services, which are the financialization and privatization of nature, which is global in scale. And this is expected to be adopted during the 15th meeting in Beijing in 2020, and that's a quote. In the final act, Act 6, Crescendo, I wrap up the series by divulging that the very foundations which have financed the climate movement, in quotes, over the past decade are the same foundations now partnered with the Climate Finance Partnership looking to unlock $100 trillion from pension funds. I reveal the identities of individuals and groups at the helm of this interlocking matrix, controlling both the medium and the message. I take a step back in time to briefly demonstrate the 10 years of strategic social engineering that have brought us to this very precipice. I look at the relationship between the World Wildlife Foundation, Stockholm Institute, and World Resources Institute as key instruments in the creation of the financialization of nature. I also take a look at the first public campaigns for the financialization of nature, natural capital as it's being called, that are slowly being brought into the public realm by the World Wildlife Federation. I reflect upon how mainstream NGOs, those are non-governmental organizations, are attempting to safeguard their influence and further manipulate the populace by going underground through Extinction Rebellion groups being organized in the U.S. and across the world. With the smoke now cleared, the weak and essentially non-existent demands reminiscent of the 2009 tick-tick-tick demands can now be fully understood. Some of these topics, in addition to others, will be released and discussed in further detail as addenda built onto the larger volume of research. This includes stepping through the looking glass with an exploration of what the real Green New Deal under the Fourth Industrial Revolution will look like. Also forthcoming is a look at the power of celebrity and how it has become a key tool for both capital and conformity. As a quick note, this series contains information and quotes that have been translated from Swedish to English via Google Translator. Act 1, and this begins with a quote. How is it possible for you to be so easily tricked by something so simple as a story? Because you are tricked. Well, it all comes down to one core thing, and that is emotional investment. The more emotionally invested you are in anything in your life, the less critical and less objectively observant you become. And this is a quote from David J.P. Phillips, who is the one on the board of directors of the We Don't Have Time company. And this was a piece called The Magical Science of Storytelling. So here is a picture underneath that first quote of Greta Thunberg when she was first protesting, and she's holding up a cardboard sign that says, "We don't have time." And it's from Facebook, October 26, 2018. Additionally, she's got an image of one of the co-founders of We Don't Have Time, Ingmar Rentzhog, written up in the Finance Monthly magazine in August of 2018. And the caption for that piece is "Climate Change, We Don't Have Time." He's on the cover. As this term is quickly becoming the quote du jour as a collective mantra to address the ongoing environmental disaster that can be best described as a nod to the obvious, it's true that we don't have time. We don't have time to stop imperialist wars, wars being the greatest contributor to climate change and environmental degradation by far, but we must do so. Of course, this is an impossible feat under the crushing weight of the capitalist system. a U.S. war economy, and the push for a fourth industrial revolution founded on renewable energy. Yet inconvenience has nothing to do with necessity in regards to addressing a particular situation. What is never discussed in regard to the so-called clean energy revolution is that its existence is wholly dependent on green imperialism, the latter term being synonymous with blood. But that's not what this series is about. This series is about new financial markets in a world where global economic growth is experiencing stagnation. The threat and subsequent response is not so much about climate change as it is about the collapse of the capitalist economic system. This series is about the climate wealth opportunity of unprecedented growth, profits, and the measures our elite classes will take in order to achieve it, including the exploitation of the youth. What is We Don't Have Time? And here's a quote from the organization. Our goal is to become among the biggest players on the internet. And that's from Ingmar Rentzhog from the Nordic Business Insider, published in December 22nd of 2017. On August 20th, 2018, a tweet featuring a photo of, quote, a Swedish girl sitting on a sidewalk was released by the tech company We Don't Have Time, founded by its CEO Ingmar Rentzhog. And here's the quote from the tweet. One 15-year-old girl in front of the Swedish parliament is striking from school until election day in 3 weeks. Imagine how lonely she must feel in this picture. People were just walking by, continuing with the business-as-usual thing. But the truth is, we can't, and she knows it. End quote. Rentzhog's tweet via the We Don't Have Time Twitter account would be the first exposure of Thunberg's now famous school strike. Tagged in Rentzhog's Lonely Girl tweet were 5 Twitter accounts: Greta Thunberg, 0 Hour, which is a youth movement, Jamie Margolin, who's the teenage founder of 0 Hour, Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and the People's Climate Strike Twitter account, which is in the identical font and aesthetics as 350.org, and I'll touch on these groups briefly later in this series. Rentzhog is the founder of Laika, a prominent Swedish communications consultancy firm providing services to the financial industry. It was recently acquired by a company called Fund by Me. He was appointed as chair of the think tank Global Utmaning, which means Global Challenge in English, on May 24, 2018, and serves on the board of Fund by Me. Rentzhog is a member of Al Gore's Climate Reality Organization Leaders, where he is part of the European Climate Policy Task Force. He received his training in March 2017 by former U.S. Vice President Al Gore in Denver, and again in June 2018 in Berlin. Founded in 2006, Al Gore's Climate Reality Project is a partner of We Don't Have Time. The We Don't Have Time Foundation cites 2 specific youth advisors and trustees, Greta Thunberg and Jamie Margolin. Martin Thorsland, Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer of We Don't Have Time, took many of the very first photos of Thunberg following the launch of her school strike on August 20th, 2018. In the following instance, photos taken by Thorsland accompany the article written by David Olson, Chief Operating Officer of We Don't Have Time. This 15-year-old girl breaks Swedish law for the climate. That's the title of the article, published August 23, 2018. And here's a quote from this article. Greta became a climate champion and tried to influence those closest to her. Her father now writes articles and gives lectures on the climate crisis, whereas her mother, a famous Swedish opera singer, has stopped flying, all thanks to Greta. And clearly, she has stepped up her game, influencing the national conversation on the climate crisis, 2 weeks before the election. We Don't Have Time reported on Greta's strike on its first day, and in less than 24 hours, our Facebook posts and tweets received over 20,000 likes, shares, and comments. It didn't take long for national media to catch on. As of the first week of the strike, at least 6 major daily newspapers as well as Swedish and Danish national television, have interviewed Greta. 2 Swedish party leaders have stopped by to talk to her as well. The article continues, "Is there something big going on here? This one kid immediately got 20 supporters who now sit next to her. This one kid created numerous news stories in national newspapers and on TV. This one kid has received thousands of messages of love and support on social media. Movements by young people, such as Jamie Margolin's This Is 0 Hour, that We Don't Have Time interviewed earlier, speaks with a much-needed urgency that grown-ups should pay attention to." Yes, there was and still is something going on. It's called marketing and branding. And here's a further quote. "Yesterday I sat completely by myself. Today there is one other here, too. There are none that I know." Greta Thunberg, August 21, 2018, quoted in the Nyheter newspaper in Sweden. This one kid immediately got 20 supporters from a Swedish network for sustainable business. What is going on is the launch of a global campaign to usher in a required consensus for the Paris Agreements, the Green New Deal, and all climate-related policies and legislation written by the power elite, for the power elite. This is necessary in order to unlock the trillions of dollars in funding by way of massive public demand. These agreements and policies include carbon capture storage, which is known as CCS, enhanced oil recovery, which is termed EOR, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, rapid total decarbonization, payments for ecosystem services, which is referred to as natural capital, nuclear energy and fission, and a host of other, quote, solutions that are hostile to an already devastated planet. What is going on is a rebooting of a stagnant capitalist economy that needs new markets, new growth, in order to save itself. What is being created is a mechanism to unlock approximately $90 trillion for new investment and infrastructure. What is going on is the creation of and investment in perhaps the biggest behavioral change experiment yet attempted, global in scale. And what are the deciding factors in what behaviors global society should adhere to? And more importantly, who decides? This is a rhetorical question, as we know full well the answer. The same Western white male saviors and the capitalist economic system they have implemented globally that has been the cause of our planetary ecological nightmare. This crisis continues unabated as they appoint themselves, yet again, as the saviors for all humanity, a recurring problem for centuries. And here's another quote. "Our goal is to become at least 100 million users. It is an eighth of all who have climbed on social media. Only last month, we managed to reach 18 million social media accounts, according to a media survey that Meltwater News made for us. At Facebook, we are currently 7 times the number of followers among the world's all-climate organizations. We are growing with 10,000 new global followers per day on Facebook." And that's a quote from We Don't Have Time CEO Ingmar Renshag, interview with Miljo and Utveckling in October 15, 2018. We Don't Have Time identifies itself as a movement and tech startup that is currently developing, quote, "the world's largest social network for climate action." The movement component was launched on April 22, 2018. The web platform is still in the progress of being built, but is to be launched on April 22nd, 2019, coinciding with Earth Day. And there's a link for that, so I assume that that actually was already launched, so you can take a look. Through our platform, millions of members will unite to put pressure on leaders, politicians, and corporations to act for the climate. It's a quote from We Don't Have Time. The startup's goal to rapidly achieve 100 million users has thus far attracted 435 investors, 74.52% of the company's shares, via the web platform funded by me. The startup intends to offer partnerships, digital advertising, and services related to climate change, sustainability, and growing green. circular economy to a, quote, large audience of engaged consumers and ambassadors. We Don't Have Time is mainly active in three markets: social media, digital advertising, and carbon offsets. In the U.S. alone, estimated market for carbon offsetting amounts to over $82 billion, of which voluntary carbon offset represents $191 million. The market is expected to increase in the future. In 2019, estimated 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions to be associated with any kind of cost for offsetting. As the company is a niche organization, social networks are able to provide services tailored to platform users. The startup has identified such an opportunity by offering its users the ability to purchase carbon offsets through the platform's own certification. This option applies to both the individual user of the platform as well as whole organizations or companies on the platform. One incentive of many identified in the startup investment section is that users will be encouraged to, quote, communicate jointly and powerfully with influential actors, end quote. Such influencers are Greta Thunberg and Jamie Margolin, who both have lucrative futures in the branding of, quote, sustainable industries and products, if they wish to pursue this path and utilizing their present celebrity for personal gain, a hallmark of the grassroots NGO movement. And she has a quote here for some further reading on this issue. There's an article called The Increasing Vogue for Capitalist-Friendly Climate Discourse. The tech company is banking on creating a massive member base of conscious users that will enable, quote, profitable commercial collaborations, for example, advertising. And here's a quote from the organization, We Don't Have Time. Decision makers, politicians, companies, organizations, states, get a climate rating based on their ability to live up to the user's initiative. Knowledge and opinion gather in one place, and users put pressure on decision makers to drive a faster change. The main sources of revenue come from commercial players who have received high climate rating and confidence in the We Don't Have Time member base. The revenue model will resemble the social platform of TripAdvisor. Their business model, with its 390 million users, annually generates over $1 billion in good profitability. We will work with strategic partners such as climate reality leaders, climate organizations, bloggers, influencers, and leading experts in the field, end quote. And there's a video here embedded as well, which is worth taking a look. Comparable to other social media endeavors where likes, followers, and unfathomable amounts of metadata determine financial success, the fact that the business is virtual enables high profit margins. The return on investment, best described as mainstream acquiescence and desirability by way of exposure, will be obtained through future dividends. In anticipation of this projected success, the tech company plans to take its business to the stock exchange in the near future. Think Facebook and Instagram. The most critical component to the success of this startup, like its predecessors, is achieving a massive member base. Therefore, according to the company, it, quote, will work actively with both enlisting influencers and creating content for various campaigns linked to the hashtag #WeDon'tHaveTime, end quote. And there's a prospectus embedded here for people to look at as well. On April 18th, 2018, the crowdfunding platform Funded by Me, utilized by We Don't Have Time to enlist investors, acquired Ingmar Rentzhog's Laika Consulting. Excerpts from the press release are as follows, and here's the quote. Funded by Me today announced that they acquire 100% of the shares in the established financial company Laika Consulting AB, a leading communications agency in financial communications. As a result, the company doubles its investment network to close to 250,000 members, making it the largest in the Nordic region. The acquisition is a strategic step to further strengthen Funded by Me's range of financial services. Ingmar Rentzhog will continue to work on strategic client projects for Funded by Me and Laika Consulting in part-time capacity. Moreover, he takes a role in the company's board. The majority of his time will focus on climate change through the newly established company We Don't Have Time, as a CEO and founder. We Don't Have Time software app. the latest wave of Western and corporate ideology at your fingertips. In October 2016, Netflix aired the third season of Black Mirror, a Twilight Zone-esque anthology TV series about technological anxieties and possible futures. The first episode, Nosedive, posits a shallow and hypocritical populace in which social platforms, self-curation, and validation-seeking have become the underpinning of a future society. Black Mirror's third season opens with a vicious take on social media, and there's a link to that. The disturbing episode shares parallels to the concept behind We Don't Have Time. The difference being, instead of rating people exclusively, we will be rating brands, products, corporations, and everything else climate-related. To illustrate how this works, Cory has embedded a quote from a piece in Acquisition International magazine discussing We Don't Have Time's platform. And it says, "Our system will be designed to highlight this and prompt businesses, politicians, and other leaders to act. If, for instance, 500 users object to the use of plastic bags in a local convenience store, the manager of that store will receive an automatically generated email from the platform, and the store's overall We Don't Have Time rating will be negatively affected. However, if the store goes on to do something about it, our users will appreciate this and improve the store's rating." End quote. The not unintended results will be tenfold. The corporations with the best advertising executives and largest budgets will be the winners. Greenwashing will become an unprecedented method of advertising, as will the art of, quote, storytelling. No one ever said a story had to be true. Small or local businesses with little financial means will more than often be the losers. Especially hit will be migrant entrepreneurs whose cultures differ from ours in the West, where Western democracy is the only democracy that's seen as valid. Adding to the conversation as to who is ultimately benefiting from this endeavor from a cultural, social, geographical, and ethnic perspective is the fact that, quote, subconscious biases about race or gender is a proven problem on many crowdsourced platforms, end quote. And she has a link to that claim. Ultimately, this means that in order to acquire the needed support as a multimedia platform, the self-interest of the Western world must be at the fore with no concern for the global South, other than what we can continue to steal from her. The inconvenient truth is that all roads lead to the same collective, if even subconscious, goal, the preservation of whiteness. It's interesting. Renshaw assures his audience that, quote, Our core, though, will remain, namely to empower our users to put pressure on world leaders so that they move faster towards an emission-free world and environmentally sustainable solutions and policies." And that's again from Acquisition International magazine, issue number 10, 2018. An emissions-free world sounds enticing, yet there are no plans whatsoever to retract our growth economies. Environmentally sustainable solutions, according to who? According to a tribal elder who upholds the principles of the seventh generation, the indigenous belief that humans must properly provide for its descendants by ensuring that our actions in the present allow the earthly survival of 7 succeeding generations, not to be confused with Unilever's seventh generation acquisition, which is a bunch of kind of green cleaning products. Or according to the World Bank? We all know the answer to this rhetorical question. Another inconvenient truth regarding the above premise is that there's a growing pressure on governments to increase federal research and development funding to develop and deploy deep decarbonization technologies as one of the primary solutions to climate change. This was proposed at the Paris Climate Accords with Bill Gates' Mission Innovation Initiative, which committed to doubling government investment in energy technology. And here's a quote. "We want it to cost more in terms of revenue, public support, and reputation to not work on lowering emissions and improve environmental sustainability, whereas those that lead the way should be recognized for this. Our vision is to create a race towards environmental sustainability and CO2 neutrality, making it the core priority for businesses, politicians, and organizations worldwide." And that's again a quote from issue number 10 of Acquisition International magazine, 2018. Here again, we must look closely at language and framing. Who are those that lead the way? Are they referring to Western citizens who can fit all their belongings in a duffel bag? Here it must be said that the environmental heroes of the West are not the Richard Bransons or Leonardo DiCaprios of the world. The real heroes for the environment, due to their almost non-existent environmental footprint, are the homeless, despite the scorn they receive from society as a whole. Are they referring to the African Maasai, who to this day literally leave no trace? Or are those that lead the way Unilever and IKEA, represented on the We Don't Have Time board? This is another rhetorical question we all know the answer to. Notice the mention of CO2 neutrality, rather than a drastic reduction of CO2 emissions. Convenient language when one of the main pillars of the business model is the sale of carbon offsets. Rationalizing a continuance of the same carbon-based lifestyle by constructing a faux fantasy one that anyone with monetary wealth can buy into. As online reviews and rating systems have become a Western staple of determining the worthiness of a person, group, or corporation, the Internet presently is a primary source of determining the quality of an entity. One example of this type of system is the online site TripAdvisor, which utilizes user feedback as a measuring stick of a hotel, airline, car rental, etc. As the TripAdvisor rating system is the revenue model We Don't Have Time seeks to emulate, we will explore this particular rating system. Whereas a reputable and established website such as TripAdvisor is based on an actual experience, We Don't Have Time evaluations are more geared toward promises into the future regarding a green technology revolution and/or the effectiveness of advertising in making people believe the veracity of these promises. By utilizing fake accounts, think Twitter and Facebook, strategically orchestrated campaigns will effectively allow the app to break political careers and demonize people and countries based on the number of ratings, or they call climate bombs. These bombs can be administered against any foe that does not embrace the technologies sought by the West to benefit the West of this so-called revolution, regardless if the reason for doing so is justifiable or not. The word bomb itself will become reframed. Rather than associating bombs with militarism, never touched upon by We Don't Have Time, the word bomb will eventually become first and foremost associated with ratings, bad products, bad ideas, and bad people. Such is the power of language and framing when combined with social engineering. Here, the behavioral economics of hatred can be weaponized, and she has a link to that idea of the behavioral economics of hatred. A virtual new form of soft power. The Nicaraguan Sandinista government, who did not sign on to the Paris Agreements because it's too weak and serves only Western interests, could quickly become a pariah on the global stage, as the West controls the stage. Already a target for destabilization, the soft power app would be applied as the ruling class sees fit. When one contemplates the non-profit industrial complex, it must be considered the most powerful army in the world. Employing billions of staff, all interconnected, today's campaigns, financed by our ruling oligarchs, can become viral in a matter of hours just by the interlocking directorate working together in unity toward a common goal to instill uniform thoughts and opinions, which gradually create a desired ideology. This is the art of social engineering. Conformity and emotive content as tools of manipulation has been and always will be the most powerful weapons in the madmen's toolbox. If 300,000 people have already voted with climate hearts on a trending topic in under 48 hours, it must be a great idea. And here's a quote from Rentshog again. Nobody wants to be bottom of the class, and that's from We Don't Have Time, December 22nd, 2017 in Nordic Business Advisor magazine. To be clear, the West is in no position to teach the correct value system regarding sustainability to the world when the biggest polluters on the planet are manufactured into climate leaders and climate heroes. This is reality turned on its head, a reality we're conditioned to accept. Institutions, such as the United Nations, in tandem with the media, spoon-feed this insanity that defies all logic to the global populace, in servitude to the ruling classes. And here's a quote again from Acquisition International Magazine, issue number 10, 2018. It's important to foster that commitment and involve the staff in the strategic work. Post-launch, we will be dependent on a committed user base, and it will be very important to implement their feedback and nudge them towards being active on our platform. Our success hinges on building an active community around our core values. End quote. Finally, this behavioral science platform lends itself to the continued devolvement of critical thinking. With virtually everything and everyone to rate all day long, who has time to look in depth at any given policy or product that, after all, sounds, looks, and feels simply amazing due to sophisticated marketing coupled with behavioral change tactics? It is vital to keep in mind that social engineering and massive profit are the key merits and purpose of this application. Okay, that's the end of Act 1 of The Manufacturing of Greta Thunberg by Cory Morningstar. Very interesting. I really wish that she'd expanded a bit on this issue of how whiteness is preserved through these types of manipulations. That would be a really interesting piece to unpack. I tend to agree with it. I don't know that it's as intentional as one might expect. These things often occur subconsciously on the part of ruling elites who organize these types of campaigns. But it would be really interesting for her to unpack some of that. But that's something we can talk about on our own as well. So I will be recording all 6 parts of this series. It's really fascinating. I'm sure it's very disheartening in some respects. Greta Thunberg has gotten so much press over the last year and seems so earnest. And Cory gets into this later in the series, where she doesn't necessarily say Greta Thunberg is some sort of cynical actor in all of this, but more that she is a piece of a larger game being played by people who have much deeper motivations and much more savvy than she may. And so in some respects, she may be kind of a pawn in this overall effort to create a kind of green capitalism that really isn't geared towards reducing carbon emissions or kind of saving the planet, if we're going to be blunt about it. But this is a really interesting series, so I recommend folks going to websites, The Art of Annihilation or The Wrong Kind of Green. They're kind of mirror websites. They tend to have the same content from Cory. But like I said, this is really, really interesting investigative work that she's done, and I've been wanting to read this for a long time. So thanks for paying attention, and we will come around with Act 2 within the next week. I'm going to take a break to get back to a little stuff from Susie Dawson, which I'll be doing next for this podcast, The Words of Others. And I think we'll be looking at some of her pieces published in Consortium News earlier this year about the Five Eyes kind of intelligence cooperation agreement between the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, the U.K., and Canada. And this kind of dovetails with her current campaign, which involves essentially helping to save herself from intelligence agency persecution and her attempts to gain refugee status in Russia right now. In fact, I think she's going to find out some important information today about that effort. So stay tuned for that. But otherwise, thanks very much, folks.